Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. So the weak position is to allow the MDGs and the SDGs to stay on separate tracks. The strong position is to find a way to bring them together under the auspices of a new global agreement around a single set of global goals. That's, in many ways, a very, very, very short summary of what Jeff was saying. I want to open it up to questions now. We've got... saved a lot of time. I'm going to take some in the room, and I'll also keep my eye to see those who are online who'd like to ask a question. We need to have you mic'd, so the mic will come round. Let's start this side of the room. Malcolm, if you want to pass the mic. Yep. And please let us know who you are. You might want to stand up so Jeff can see you.
Hi, my name's Sasha Jesperson. I'm from the London School of Economics. Alongside the two tracks that you've mentioned with sustainability and the more diplomatic side, there's also been discussions about including security in the post-MDG agenda, so I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Great. Shall we take a few?
Yeah, I think so. And next door to you?
Maybe if I could have a piece of paper, so I could just...
Take this.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Hi, I'm Rachel Garthwaite from Save the Children UK. You spoke at the beginning of your presentation about the need to improve integration in the Sustainable Development Agenda, and then you laid out your 4 pillars for the next framework, and I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on how you actually propose to improve integration between those pillars, because we've been talking about those pillars for a long time, and actually the biggest barrier is identifying how we can actually improve integration.
Great, thanks. We come round to the front, then I will go to the back, everyone. The gentleman here right at the front.
Thanks. Mark Galloway from IBT, the International Broadcasting Trust. One of the interesting ideas circulating is that poor people should have a say in the post-2015 agenda. Do you think that's a good idea, and how feasible is that?
I'll pass it over to Sheila here, and then we'll take those and we'll go for another round.
Thank you, Sheila Page, ODI. I really want to follow up a similar question to that. One of the problems of trying to redo the exercise is that last time the middle-income countries were very much on the side. It was between the developed and the poorer countries, and your whole presentation mentioned them just once, and your example at the end mentioned only developed and developing countries. How can you involve them in it? And more generally, is this actually a process that can be repeated once people know what the outcome was? I'm thinking of the Uruguay round of the WTO, which was able to succeed because people didn't realize what they were doing to the disputes procedure.
Good point. Do you want to take those and then
Sure.
I'll go around?
I think we can all agree this is not easy because it's trying to create something useful that also has, this time, the legitimacy of a consensus of some sort, of a deliberative and negotiated process. And in a world of 7.1 billion people that is very noisy indeed and easily distracted, getting there is not so easy. Of course, we have a lot that we can draw upon. We're not starting from a blank slate, and if we tried to start from a blank slate, we would never fill the slate. So we should draw upon things that have been agreed, frameworks that are in place, language and commitments that are part of a negotiated history till now. And indeed, the MDGs arose not simply from Kofi Annan's pen, though that's probably the best shorthand, but they were adopted by taking goals that had been agreed during the various summits of the 1990s and updating them. And so they had that legitimacy and could be put into the process. Again, I rather like the idea of sustainable development as an organizing principle because it feels to me right for our time, given the fact that we clearly face major challenges of integrating economic, social, and environmental considerations. A three-pillar framework strikes me as the right way to proceed. Of course, I'm completely biased. I am professor of sustainable development. But I took that title. I wasn't assigned it when I was asked When I came to Columbia, what do I want my title to be? I said I want to be called Sustainable Development Professor, because I think that that is the right organizing principle. And we have a history of it. And we have the world having just said that we should integrate these 3 agenda items. It strikes me that it's possible to do, therefore. There's a tremendous amount of distrust in the world, for good reason. Everybody cuts corners. And the rich countries say, well, you know, why don't the poor countries sign on to our green agenda and so forth? What's the matter with them? And they say, well, because rich countries haven't followed through on one thing they've promised over the years. And, you know, cheers to the UK for following through, and we hope all the way to 0.7. But the history of this process has been broken promises. Glen Eagles, which was the high point of the promising, did not obviously achieve fulfillment at the end of the day. The world's imperfect, but we've made progress. And so we shouldn't let those all too obvious imperfections stop us from taking the next steps. So my view is we have the grounding to move forward. If we push too hard on any one particular agenda, we will break this process. And everybody's got their dimension that they would like to push to the end. And if we push too hard, there will be no consensus, that's for sure. So this will require leadership and a bit of good luck to get us to something workable, useful, albeit imperfect, just like the Millennium Development Goals. If you ask me why 2/3 reduction of this, 3/4 reduction of this, half reduction of this, I can't tell you. That wasn't based on the ultimate of science, ethics, or anything else. These were judgments that were not bad, useful, stretch goals. And I think that we can do the same. So, but it's not a simple process. There will be lots of deliberation, that's for sure. Governments, in the end, will be the actors that decide, because that's how our system works, at least up until now. But there will be lots of discussion, including, I hope, voices of the poor in many different forums that are already taking place or being conceived. There's lots of online consultations that have been quite creative, that already played a role in Rio +20. I think we'll have a good, robust discussion. I'm actually not worried about the robustness of the discussion. I'm worried about whether there's convergence towards something in the end. That strikes me as a harder view, and I mean a harder thing to achieve. And that's where we're going to all need to take a little bit of a deep breath at the end, and I hope sign on to something that is that's plausible. In terms of adding security, I think that there's one obvious point, which is that a lot of the violence in the world today is in poor and environmentally stressed areas. There is an arc of violence that stretches basically from the Sahel in West Africa through the Horn of Africa, through the Arabian Peninsula, and into Central Asia. And that is probably the most concentrated band of global violence from Mali to Afghanistan. And it's unfortunately a lot of violence is stretching on that path. My own view is that what we're seeing there is the violence that comes from extreme poverty, massive demographic stress, and lots of hunger, all exacerbated by climate change. It's called Al-Qaeda, it's called Islamic extremism, it's called all sorts of things. And of course, there are real pressures, real weapon systems, real interests at play, no doubt. But these are the poorest places in the world, and they're under incredible stress. These are hungry, chronically hungry places, experiencing in general declining rainfall, more drought, more of the climate disasters. And it's absolutely natural for that reason to view the security issues and the poverty and the environmental issues in an integrated manner. That's, I believe that is analytically correct. Unfortunately, this is not how it tends to be seen by major powers. It's interesting, actually. The national intelligence community in the United States does actually see it this way, strangely enough. The Pentagon and the foreign policy does not see it this way. The United States is ready to spend trillions for war, but almost nothing for development, for example. It's shocking how bad the malinvestments are in this regard. There's very little understanding in practical terms of how you could address security issues through a peaceful, sustainable development approach. But we absolutely need that, and the instability will continue to get worse until we have that. And so in this sense, I think that it's inevitable that this be brought into the agenda. Finally, on the integration of the pillars, this question's asked constantly. It's a good question, but I find that if you actually work on almost any policy or programmatic issue, it's inevitable that the integration is there. You can't actually think about economic life without asking about resiliency, hazards, climate change, the nature of the physical underpinnings of production and so forth. You can't really face issues of the environment without asking about the development strategies and the poverty reduction approaches that are being taken. So even though they are distinct objectives, the underlying, what's nice about sustainable development is that you're forced to think simultaneously about a number of objectives as you pursue your policy making. What tends to, of course, be the norm is, say, in an area like energy. Energy policy is vital for almost any part of this agenda, of course, and any part of an economic agenda. But if you try to make energy policy outside of a sustainable development framework, then you end up with gas fracking and other things without the slightest recognition in the policy making that this might not be conducive to solving the carbon problem on the environmental side. So sustainable development, in my view, is an intellectual discipline that forces you to take a holistic and integrated view of almost any strategy that you're following, on whether it's agriculture, land use, energy policy, and so forth. You have to ask a series of pertinent questions because you don't have just one goal in mind, you have multiple goals in mind. And that's a very good intellectual discipline as well as a policy framework in order to get more accurate answers.
Good. Okay, we've only got about 10 minutes left, so very quickly I'm going to take a few from this side of the room. Ben first, and then there's two here, and Gina. And I have one question online.
Ben Ramelingham, ODI and IDS. Jeff, thank you for your talk. You talked about lessons and critics quite a lot, and at the end you seem to kind of equate critics to cynics. I guess I'd like to point out humbly that not all the critics are cynics. And And DFID, where you're going on to next, one of the leading managers there talked about the danger of the MDGs essentially being a phenomena where we hit the target but miss the point. And when we look at things like water and poverty, which have been met recently, they've been largely met because of the uprise of China, which didn't necessarily subscribe to the MDGs or the policy frameworks around that. So there's a bit of a challenge here. I guess my question to you is, for you personally, are there any lessons from the critics that you feel need to play a part in the next round of goal setting?
Okay, hold on to that. The lady there on the end next to Claire. And then Gina back there.
Hi, Sue Bishop, until recently ActionAid, now independent consultant. You mentioned the importance of inspiring and mobilising civil society and how important it is that this new set of goals is communicable. So I'd be interested in knowing, especially in relation to rich countries, what you think the real value is, what you think can be achieved by inspiring and mobilising the public.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Tina Berg from ODI. Thank you for your comments.
Where are you? There.
Sorry. Thank you for your comments on integration from a kind of conceptual and political perspective. I'm also really interested in terms of the process, any comments you have on the integration of these two separate tracks, particularly considering that the post-MDGs process high-level panel will be reporting of 2013, and then the open working group considerably after that. So how do you see those marrying up from a process perspective?
Great, thank you. And just a couple of things coming in online from Malcolm Ridout, who's actually with UNDP. Given the likely impact of climate change, population growth, etc., is there an argument for a goal on how crisis is dealt with rather than only sustainable outcomes? Another one from Jonathan Algar of Bright Blue here in London. The global macroeconomic picture has shifted significantly since the original goals were set. How will the rise of the BRICS and beyond influence the process? There's quite a lot there in your last 5 minutes, so feel free to pick and choose.
I think you have gotten my drift that not only do I want one set of goals, but I would like to see those goals apply to all countries, because there are essentially no countries in the world that are actually achieving sustainable development. There are a couple that are coming close, but not so many out of the 193 member states. Certainly not most of the rich countries, and certainly not the middle-income countries either. So this idea of a more holistic framework that integrates economic objectives, social objectives, and environmental objectives, in my view, would be highly salutary for every country. I would love for Americans to have a more balanced and rounded view of these issues. If we had, for the United States, sustainable development goals such that we were tracking the rising inequality of wealth and income over the last 30 years, we would have been alerted to things more systematically than has been the case. The U.S. went way off the rails on many different areas over the last 30 years, but because we track GNP and a few other indicators, the salience of these factors depends on very difficult process of trying to break through the policy miasma, and this occasionally happens. But for example, Americans were very unaware in general of the rising income inequality, the sharply rising Gini, the very widening gaps. You might say it's obvious, but it wasn't obvious. It wasn't in the political milieu. It wasn't discussed. It took a few academic studies and then Occupy Wall Street to really put this on the agenda. It should have been on the agenda 20 years earlier, because we should be watching indicators more systematically. Of course, Americans are almost unaware of their 20 tons per capita per year of greenhouse gas emissions and so forth, CO2 emissions and so forth. These things need to be watched, measured, monitored by everybody. And so I not to mention the governance indicators that might come. So it seems to me that these are the kinds of goals that would do a lot of good everywhere. And I don't view them as goals by rich countries for poor countries. I view them as a better measure of what a decent society is, one that can support well-being on a sustained basis, not wreck the planet, not divide our societies into, and not let government get taken over by the corporate sector, for example. So I'd rather that these be universal in application as well as integrated in strategy, and I don't see that as a tactic to engage the rich countries and the poor countries. I see that as a way to engage the rich countries in their own fate, which is sadly lacking and very unclear right now. So in this sense, that's what I really mean by all of this. I don't think at all, by the way, that the MDGs hit the target but missed the point. They hit the target in the aggregate because of China, that's exactly right. But they didn't miss the point because from the beginning they have been country-based. And they have driven a higher level of consideration for poor people than dozens and dozens of governments ever had. More organized thinking about objectives, ways to proceed, best practices, and so forth. So I don't think they missed the point. I think they missed the target in a lot of countries. And there are a lot of reasons for that, both that some of this is hard, but also that one of the big ideas of the Millennium Development Goals, that this was a compact of rich and poor countries, didn't quite materialize. It came in certain areas, like my favorite innovation of this period, establishing the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. That was a great institutional advance that allowed new attention to 3 crippling diseases, and it came in the MDG context. And it was definitely important. But Glenn Eagle's failure was the counterpart to that, of a promising of a doubling of aid to Africa that never materialized, for example. So I don't think it missed the point. I just think we missed everything that we should have done in the period. And nobody's making hay, or should, that, oh, it's great, everything's been achieved. Look, we made the goal on poverty. Nobody should ever say that. That isn't the point. You make the goal when poverty is cut everywhere, when extreme poverty is eliminated everywhere. And so it would miss the point if we were championing China's success in this as the solution to Africa's poverty. But I don't know anybody that does that in any serious way. And it would be foolhardy, actually, to take that approach.
Just take one more, Jeff.
You asked me about the criticisms and so on. It's actually not the criticism, but I think that there's one major thing that the MDGs show us that we should do a lot better. Let's assume we get to goals that actually are agreed and that have meaning and coherence. The MDGs, the weakest part of the MDGs was in measurement by far. And often we don't even know. There weren't baselines that were clear, even though they were set against 1990 standards formally. Many countries didn't have 1990 good measurements. But often some of the key things that are supposed to be monitored in the Millennium Development Goals are only captured in survey data 3 or 4 years late. This, from the point of view of us in the development community, I think should end. And whatever we agree, we should have timely not only a commitment, but a strategy for very timely within the year and often real-time monitoring. The whole thickness of the information system has improved profoundly since the MDG process. The fact that there is mobile everywhere and 3G will be nearly everywhere by the end of this decade makes it possible to completely, dramatically upgrade information. And I think if we did that, we would put all of this on a far more serious basis than we have right now. This, I think, is the single biggest weakness of the Millennium Development Goal process, the fact that we have very long lags and very poor information that could be quite dramatically improved. Finally, how can these two tracks come together? I personally hope that the high-level panel, and then after that, Secretary General in his report to the General Assembly in 2013 will call for a robust, bold, global, integrated agenda. And if the high-level panel does a good job on this, it will have a very, very powerful effect on all that comes afterward. This is a really esteemed group. It is a very important and very diverse group. You don't have the good fortune to have this kind of group come along all that often, so they ought to do a good job would be my strong recommendation. And they ought to really think hard about the responsibility that they've been given, obviously, because they can help to shape this agenda in a very powerful way. And so a robust report from the high-level panel doesn't preclude the intergovernmental process from doing all sorts of things, but I think it could put that process on a vastly stronger basis by showing what a coherent, bold, integrated, universal approach to these objectives would mean. And with the weight of powerful political leaders behind it, it would have a very, very big impact. And so I'm thinking that this works in sequence. Don't wait till the end. Let's have a great report from the high-level panel. And then from there, I think it will make it easier for every following step to get to where we need to go.
Great, thank you very much. Somewhere I signed in blood that I would get Jeffrey Sachs out of here and into a taxi at 11:20, so I'm going to have to follow through on that commitment. I want to thank you very much indeed for taking this time. You've given us enormous amount to chew on. I hope you've all really taken a lot away from this short time with you. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you to scoop yourself out. I'll get you into that taxi, and I'll say goodbye to everyone else. Thank you.